get some insights from the former federal cabinet minister and the current premier of Alberta. He joins us now, Jason Kenney. Great to have you here. Premier, before we start on that, we just had Bill Morneau on talking about the federal government's response to what could be an economic recession caused by coronavirus. It was hard to determine if they've actually got a plan. What's your sense of how the federal government is preparing for the economic fallout of the coronavirus?
Well, Evan, I would say that it's exactly because of a potential event like this why governments should try to be fiscally responsible. If you're running large deficits, even during times of reasonably good growth, it doesn't bode well for inevitable downturns. And certainly in Alberta, we're trying to do our part with a policy to reduce spending prudently by about 3%. Based on our current projections, that would get us to a balanced budget, eliminating the largest provincial deficit in Canada over the next 3 years. Obviously, that plan may be affected as well if there is a major global downturn. Alberta is perhaps a little bit more vulnerable than other provinces because the downturn would really impact commodity prices with lower energy prices, for example. So we're concerned. We think Ottawa should be, and I think it's a cautionary lesson to all governments across the partisan and geographic spectrum that fiscal responsibility is important.
Right. But, Premier, tomorrow Bill Morneau is going to talk to your finance minister and the finance ministers across the country. What message about preparing for this coronavirus fallout will your finance minister be delivering? Like, what do you guys want to hear right now from the federal government?
Well, first of all, I mean, in terms of the coronavirus, obviously, we have excellent public health officials across Canada. Our own cabinet was just briefed by our chief medical officer today, and they're liaising closely with the Public Health Agency of Canada. So I think there is, very competent leadership, technical leadership on containing and potentially mitigating the virus should it come to Canada. But on the economic and fiscal front, Evan, we continue to be in our 5th year of economic stagnation in this province. Some indications that we may have actually been in a recession last year in this province, and incomes are still down by 10 points. Unemployment far too high in this province, a province that has been a huge generator of job creation, high incomes, and tax revenue for the rest of the country. So our request to Ottawa is to give us at least a little bit of fairness in terms of fiscal transfers. We contribute about $20 billion net to the rest of the country. We're asking, and we're supported by all 13 provinces and territories in this, we're asking for a retroactive lifting of the fiscal stabilization program, which is kind of an equalization rebate for half provinces that go into a significant downturn. So we hope that we'll get a positive response to that call from all provinces.
Yeah, and I know you've talked about that, but I think, first of all, everybody across the country appreciates the very difficult time that's happening in Alberta, the high unemployment rates, the serious downturn. But a lot of folks are saying that for political purposes, you've been stoking feelings of separatism and blaming the government. And some have said, look, Premier Kenney, Alberta's still got the highest per capita income in the country, the lowest rates of poverty. I'm not trying to in any way diminish the pain going on there. Still the lowest corporate personal tax, no sales tax. The equalization formula that you don't like so much was negotiated by Stephen Harper when you were a senior minister in there. You're not going to propose in your new budget a new sales tax. So, I remember Jim Prentice saying Alberta's got to look in the mirror. Is that a moment as well, not just for the federal government, but also for your own government?
You packed an awful lot in there, Evan. Let me put it this way. Albertans have never really objected to the generosity of contributing over $600 billion net to the rest of the Federation since about 1960. What we ask for is the ability to develop that wealth in the future. And when Stephen Harper modified the equalization program, you'll recall it upset Quebec and Newfoundland. But when he changed that program back in several years ago, we had a federal government that was approving pipelines, that was defending Canada's energy industry. Now we have a government that killed the approved Northern Gateway pipeline, killed Energy East by changing the regulatory rules midstream, that through regulatory uncertainty participated in killing the $20 billion tech resource mine, that uncertainty that drove Kinder Morgan out of the country, left taxpayers holding the bag on the Trans Mountain expansion. The Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, the tanker ban, which prejudicially attacks a resource from only one province, Alberta, and many other policies that have been, have had a huge damage to our economy here. We're not asking for a special deal. We're just asking for the ability to develop the resources that have done so much to employ Canadians and build schools and hospitals from coast to coast.
And I get that, but I'm just trying to figure things out. Like the tech mine is a really important thing. You've said you wish that was approved. It could be potentially in the future 7,000 jobs. But the president of tech mine called out the federal government for sure. He also called out your province, as did the Calgary Chamber of Commerce, to get more serious about climate change, committing to a cap on oil sands emissions. But there's a lot of the focus is on the carbon price. Has that recalibrated your own view that maybe you got to make peace on the climate issue and make something of that to try to get businesses some stability on that, Premier?
Well, it's up to the federal government to give stability, and stability means potential to grow, but turning investment into jobs and returns in this country and in Alberta. But Evan, the day after, within 12 hours of winning the April provincial election last year here in Alberta, I was on the phone with the Prime Minister indicating our willingness to bring in the regulations for the 100 megaton cap that had been negotiated with my NDP predecessors. I indicated our willingness to talk about a $30 level for the levy on major emitters. We actually went ahead and did that without getting anything back from Ottawa. We did finally get an equivalency agreement between us and the federal government on that major emitters levy, which is like 10 times more effective in addressing CO2 emissions than the retail consumer tax that punishes people for heating their homes in the winter. And we're also working on rigorous methane regulations, seeking a federal equivalency agreement. Our joint study shows that our regs are actually more effective than Ottawa's at lower cost. We've worked with the federal government and Indigenous communities on wildlife and habitat protection for caribou and bison, for example, around the proposed tech mine. I've been asking the federal government now for 9 months to work with us on a common understanding, to find common ground on these challenging issues. And last week, Seamus O'Regan admitted that the federal government doesn't have a net zero policy. That was something they threw into their platform with apparently very little understanding of how to implement it. Yeah. So we're willing and ready to sit down at any time. But I got to tell you, on the tech thing, tech never once, in months working with us, ever raised Alberta climate policy. I mean, it was in the letter. Evan. That's all. I mean, I just read the letter. I don't know. I mean, they clearly said in the Chamber of Commerce, listen, there's probably a lot of factors there, the price of oil, maybe the instability and the resistance. But that's clearly one of the issues. They believe that
Go ahead.
Regulatory uncertainty is the issue. It should have been approved. That company wanted it approved, but the months of further attacks on that company is something that is a price they weren't prepared to pay because of the federal delays. Federal government should have been in a position to approve that because it is a path forward. Projects like that would operate at less than half the carbon intensity of the oil sands generally, less than half that would be in the bottom half of carbon intensity for North American oil. That's the way forward as long as the world needs that kind of energy. And we're willing to work with the federal government within reason on that as long as there's a path to growth and jobs.
All right, and we'll find out if Alberta ends up investing in some of those things, but I got to leave it there for now. Premier Kenney, great to have you on the program. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vet. Thanks very much, Evan.